we're seeing, again, for us, 11-point lead is the largest lead the Liberals have had since August of 2021. Mark Carney's government's approval rating has hit its highest level. His personal numbers are up. Even the optimism within the country has hit a level we have not seen since before the pandemic.
12 months into their mandate, the Carney Liberals appear to be more popular than when they started, while polls show the Conservatives down. Pierre Poilievre has also lost 3 MPs to defections. All this while the NDP chooses a new leader and with a new direction. So where do the parties go from here? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Catherine Levesque is an Ottawa parliamentary reporter for the National Post. Ian Bailey, a reporter for the Globe and Mail. And Eric Grenier, a polling analyst at the Writ. He's also in Ottawa today. Good day to all 3 of you.
How are you doing?
Good morning.
Eric, I'm going to start with you because you will know better than I. Usually a government is not more popular a year into its mandate than when it got elected. What do you think is going on?
Yeah, it's especially the case when it's a government that's also been in power for now over a decade. I do think that what we've seen is that Mark Carney's own personal approval ratings, his own personal popularity has boosted the Liberals quite significantly. I think that we've seen from many different polls that the way that Mark Carney is approaching international issues, his relationship with the United States, is meeting a bit the moment of what Canadians are looking for right now. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. There's a lot of unpredictability. And Mark Carney being a bit of a serious kind of character, kind of unflappable, I think is what we're seeing in the polls. Canadians seem to like quite a bit. Catherine,
where does this leave the Conservatives?
It's extremely difficult. I mean, I think we've seen until now, after the election, Pierre Poilievre seemed to be licking his wounds a little bit, wasn't really sure where to go, with this new Liberal Party, this new government. And frankly, I mean, I think in some way the parliamentary calendar, just the way things happened, seemed to benefit the Carney Liberals, just because until the end of January, Pierre Poilievre was solely focused on winning his leadership vote. So, his focus was really on that. Since then, we've seen the Conservatives kind of taking more steps, taking more risks. And, Pierre Poilievre now traveling. So that's something that's new. But really, it's really been difficult for them, I would say. And in the House of Commons, we've seen them kind of go about the same questions about the cost of living, which is, very important, of course, but it's been kind of the same questions. We've also seen a lot of talk about the carbon tax. That's something that's been, constant in the House of Commons. And you've seen very little questions about other super important issues like Iran, for instance. And I think there's been some missed opportunities, certainly from the Conservatives, to attack the Liberal government on that front.
Ian, I do wonder on what level it matters, just to the extent that we've had the defections, we have the by-elections coming, and so there could well be a pathway to a slim majority for the Carney Liberals, which means no election necessarily required anytime soon. Does that change the dynamic?
Well, I can only imagine this is acutely painful for the government. They have these incredible poll ratings, but they can't cash them in and get the majority, a real majority that I'm sure that Mr. Carney would like to have, as opposed to a slim majority of a few seats here and there that could go down due to circumstances. So it's a chat, but it seems with the by-elections in mid-April that the government is going to go a little bit further on the distance. We may see an election later on, but for now they're going to hold on. I got to say, the party I'm looking at with great interest is the NDP, way down, picking a new leader next week. I have no doubt that the NDP will someday come back as a more of a force in Canadian politics. But the question at this point is whether it's going to be a 10-year thing, a few-year thing, or how that's going to work out.
And whether it'll be with their next leader, that's another question.
Well, exactly.
Well. Yeah.
They do have, they did do a review of that party. It was done by Ottawa lawyer Emily Taman, which she spent most of 2025 out there across the country, working online, talking to New Democrats, and came up with a sort of a renewal plan. So that'll be, so to speak, I'm sure on the desk of the new leader when that leader is picked next week. But of course, it'll take luck, more than a plan, it'll take a lot of luck for that party to come back from the heights that they had not so many years ago.
Speaking of heights, and it was just a little more than a year ago that the Conservatives were at considerable heights, so I want to talk about them. Catherine, I'll turn to you. Pierre Poilievre, of course, has made it through the leadership review. In the intervening time, he's lost another Conservative MP. That brings up to 3, plus there's the 4th who went from the NDP to the Liberals. Where does Pierre Poilievre sit in the midst of all of this? Yes, he has the approval of the party, but he doesn't have the strength in polling anymore.
That's a very good question. I mean, certainly, like I said, he's had some difficulty trying to find his feet. I think now he's starting to understand that he has to be on Team Canada and he has to advocate for Canada. I mean, he already was in some way in some domestic matter, but now he's going on the world stage and kind of doing that. And, our colleague from the Toronto Star, Susan Delacourt, had a really interesting column where she said, Pierre Poilievre is on Team Canada and Mark Carney is the captain. So we're seeing more collaboration. I think for the Conservatives, there's also a notion that, look, they might find themselves in the opposition with a majority government, and they might be in the opposition benches for many more years. It will be a challenge for Pierre Poilievre because he has been the leader for, he's entering his 4th year. He has been the leader for 3.5 years. And if we have an election in 2029, I mean, he will have been the leader for a very long time. So I think the question is really, will we see more defections? Are more Conservatives going to be crossing to the Liberal benches? That is certainly going to be very, very difficult for him. And can he stay on ultimately? Are his MPs going to use the Reform Act to ultimately kick him out? I don't think that's a bubbling question right now, but maybe in a few months or years that'll be a question that we'll be talking about.
I do have a question which actually comes entirely from the CBC News Sunday political newsletter Minority Report. And it comes after Pierre Poilievre was on the Rogan podcast, talked about texting the Prime Minister from time to time, that they are seemingly, in communication with some frequency. So here is the question posed from the newsletter. I'll throw it out to any of you. Are Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre friends now?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I saw the newsletter this morning. I think that, for Mr. Poilievre, there's a political interest in being seen to be friends with the Prime Minister because Mr. Poilievre is clearly trying to change his image. And it looks good to show that he's able to engage with, the captain of Team Canada. It's sort of part of changing that image. And clearly, the poll numbers we've talked about show that Mr. Poilievre has work to do in that regard. I don't know how Mr. Carney feels about whether he is friends with Mr. Poilievre. That would be an interesting question to ask him.
Anyone else?
I think that for Pierre Poilievre, it is a very different situation for him. He came to the height of his popularity when he was contrasted to Justin Trudeau, who was very unpopular. And people like to see someone like Pierre Poilievre kind of beat up on Justin Trudeau because he was, they could live vicariously through Pierre Poilievre. But now they have a situation where Mark Carney is far more popular than Pierre Poilievre. So for the Conservative leader to attack the Prime Minister might actually get people's backs up a little bit more. They might be a bit more defensive. So I think that for him, he's happy to portray himself as getting along well with Mark Carney because he actually wants some time. I think the thing that Pierre Poilievre needs more than anything is an election further down the road because we've seen lots of polling that suggests, for example, that Mark Carney has a huge advantage over Pierre Poilievre on who Canadians want to handle the relationship with Donald Trump. So while that is one of the top issues, Pierre Poilievre really can't compete with Mark Carney. If in 2029, if he can hold on to the leadership that long, if instead we're talking about the economy and cost of living, that's where he's competitive, and that's where he could actually compete with Mark Carney in an election right now.
And of course, in 2029, at least according to the U.S. Constitution, Donald Trump is no longer in the White House.
Supposedly.
And that would be good news for Pierre Poilievre, I think.
Pierre Poilievre is back in Canada after a week-long visit to the U.S., and the Conservative leader spent close to 3 hours on the Joe Rogan Experience, a podcast with an audience of more than 20 million.
We're very proudly Canadian, so we're never going to be the 51st state. And I just wish you'd knock that shit off so that we can get back to talking about the things that we can do as two separate countries that are actually friends. And the tariffs aren't a good idea either. We should get the tariffs out because there's so much we could be doing together as neighbors and partners if we got rid of those tariffs.
The two covered everything from the trade war and the oil sands to the last election, even mixed martial arts. Poilievre spoke out against the 51st state talk for the first time on American soil. It's actually his first visit since he became party leader in 2022. So what was the calculus behind this trip? I asked the Conservative Party's campaign manager, Steve Outhouse. Steve Outhouse, good to have you here.
Hey, thanks, David. Thanks for having me.
Pierre Poilievre now back in the country. This was his first visit to the U.S. since becoming leader, since Trump has been president, since the tariff war began, everything around trade. Why was now the right time for Poilievre to visit?
First thing is parliamentary calendar. We've been working around that and figuring out when timing and schedules can work. But secondly, this is, continues to be an issue that's important to the Canadian people, and the leader wanted to, pitch into the Team Canada approach and make sure that we are, adding our voices to those who are advocating for strong trade between Canada and the U.S., tariff-free trade, protecting Canadian jobs, and showing how a strong trade relationship can affect both sides of the border. So,
is any part of it, Steve, that the Prime Minister gets to travel as the Prime Minister, has been traveling a lot as Prime Minister, and that you want to be able to position the Conservative leader as having the same kind of skill set?
Well, definitely. When I took this job, a lot of people in the media and a lot of people who would come and offer their thoughts and suggestions and so on have indicated quite clearly they want to see more sides of Pierre Poilievre. They want to see him not just in the House of Commons and being able to very effectively hold the government to account. They want to see him in leadership roles. And so certainly, yes, being a part of this shows maybe a side that people haven't seen before. And I'm sure we'll touch on it, but media interviews to the international community and so on are ways that he can share that message with a broader audience and show that what he can look like on the world stage as well. Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about the biggest interview, or at least the biggest audience in terms of interviews, and that is the Joe Rogan podcast. It is huge. No question about the potential benefit for Pierre Poilievre, but there's no question that Rogan comes with risk. He has embraced conspiracy theories in the past. And so I wonder, for you, as the campaign manager, what goes into your calculus in deciding, the risk-benefit ratio there?
Yeah. Well, a few different things. First of all, I don't think you ever agree fully with everyone that you speak with, and certainly someone who's interviewing you. David, if you and I sat down and listed all of our beliefs and so on, we might not be, in agreement on everything as well. But we're looking at a couple different objectives there. First of all, the leader was speaking to an American audience to talk about, if we are working together, if these tariffs could be dropped, then this could affect things like the prices of trucks, and it can mean better jobs, and it can mean things being more affordable, because cost of living is important on both sides of the border. So that was sort of the first measure, is if we're looking to reach as many people as we can in the American market, for lack of a better phrase, then certainly the podcast with the largest audience, I believe, in the world, would be good to do that. And the secondary audience is absolutely domestic, and Mr. Rogan does have a large listenership here in Canada, and I do think a conversational style gave a chance for the leader for Pierre Poilievre to show kind of different sides of himself.
Steve, I want to ask you about polls. I'm not going to repeat what they say, but broadly that it would appear that Carney's Liberals are higher in the polls by 10, 11 points over the Conservatives. It comes at a time that we are not expecting an election, that the Liberals may end up picking up those 2 seats they need to get to a slim majority in by-elections. Maybe, we'll see. But what do you do in your job as campaign manager right now to not just ensure that you're ready, but be playing the long game in case it is 4 years until another election?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a few different things. Polls are polls, and they do what polls do, and they're snapshots in time, and they go up and they go down. And definitely, what you need to do if you're talking about long game is to not worry about them on the day-to-day basis. We want to get out there every day. We want to chart the path that we believe is going to, first of all, talk about the issues that people care about. And if we're talking about polls, what we've seen, is that affordability and cost of living is consistently at the top of of the polls as to what shapes people's, their day-to-day lives and the things that matter the most to them. And so, ultimately, yes, there are distractions and other issues that come up on the daily that people will talk about. But if they're not able to feed their families or not able to find housing, those are things that are going to matter. And Pierre Poilievre and the Conservative team are focused on that. But look, I've led, now 3 different provincial campaigns, and in Alberta, now Premier Smith was behind in the polls when we started that campaign. Now Premier Wakeham was significantly underwater in whatever public polls were available in terms of preferred premier going into that. Led our opponents there actually to get quite complacent. And so, we just have to keep charting our course and talking to Canadians every day, talking about issues that matter to them, and that's the long game. And on the short term, as you've alluded to, the timing of the election will not be within our control, and so my job is in part to make sure that we're ready to go whenever that might happen.
Steve Outhouse, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, David.
All right, let's unpack Pierre Poilievre's trip to the U.S. and the overall message of his appearance on Joe Rogan. We'll do that with our Sunday Scrum. Catherine Levesque, an Ottawa parliamentary reporter with the National Post, Ian Bailey, a reporter with the Globe and Mail, and Eric Grenier, polling analyst at the Writ. All 3 are in Ottawa this morning. Good day once again to all 3 of you.
How are you doing?
Hi, David.
Catherine, let me start with you. For any politician sitting down for nearly 3 hours, it's hard to stay on message track.
Absolutely. It's a good thing that he has a lot of history of, fitness and training and kettlebells because he filled a lot of that time with that. But yes, I think we really saw a new side of Pierre Poilievre, a very thoughtful side, someone who just knows a lot of facts. And but someone also who is solely focused on defending Canada, and he was bringing that to the world, well, to the American stage at least. And, Steve Outhouse said something that's interesting. I mean, this was also for a domestic audience. And, just last week I was on the road. I was sitting at Herb's, which is a diner in Eastern Ontario. And people at tables were talking about that Joe Rogan interview. So certainly this has been noticed. People, saw what Pierre Poilievre has done, and I think they really have a good impression of this interview. He stayed classy. He pushed back against conspiracy theories, not all of them, but most of them, and he didn't engage in petty politics against Mark Carney or even Justin Trudeau for that matter. So it was completely different from the apple chomping persona that we saw in the past. We really saw a new side of Pierre Poilievre, and I think that's a side that was there all along.
Ian, deciding to do Rogan, the upside is clear. You get an audience of 20 million. You get people talking about it at Herb's, for instance, but there is a potential risk in doing it. He's a guy who's embraced some conspiracy theories in the past. What do you think was the thinking going on among the Conservatives heading into that interview?
Well, obviously it's the massive audience for that podcast. It's the fact, I guess, the podcast sticks around. It's the fact that Canadians do watch this podcast. Obviously, the American audience are not going to be casting votes in the Canadian election, but Canadians do watch this show, and it's still there. And it's 2.5 hours. I listen to a lot of podcasts. 2.5 hours to me was a long run, but Mr. Poilievre had a sort of a massive stage on which to sort of present a new image, a kind of a more genial, less snarky kind of image. And frankly, he did that extremely well. The only way this could have been more of a win is if Joe Rogan had said, come back next month. Why don't we make this a regular thing? And if this had gone on. The challenge for Mr. Poilievre, the House is back tomorrow. He's back here. Can he keep this up? Can he be the Pierre Poilievre he presented on the Rogan show in perpetuity, or at least until the next election? And that's going to be one of the challenges he faces. One other thing, by the way, it's good for Conservatives, I guess. The polls, I know Mr. Outhouse had a view on polls, but the polls are pretty grim for the Conservatives. By appearing on Rogan, doing well, it's clear from social media that Conservatives who may be uneasy about the state of the party have gotten something to be happy about, something to talk about in addition to voters, and that's also going to be helpful, I think, to Mr. Poilievre.
Eric, I'll get your thoughts.
I think it was a good podcast for Poilievre. It was, as you said, very long, and it did have a portion that I think would have lost a lot of the audience. But the thing is, it wasn't really that he was supposed to make gains among the people who would watch regularly the Joe Rogan show. They would largely, in Canada, be people who would already be open to Pierre Poilievre. But we've seen lots of coverage of this podcast. We're talking about it right now. And some of the headlines are pretty good headlines for Pierre Poilievre, that he stood up to Donald Trump on the 51st state stuff, that he was polite to Mark Carney when he had a chance not to be. So I think that is actually probably the larger benefit that he's going to get from this podcast, not so much the people who are going to get through the 2.5 podcasts. And if you're not a fan of MMA or kettlebells, it is a bit of a slog to listen to that back half of the podcast. But if all you are seeing are some of the clips that we've seen online, some of the coverage, then it's a pretty big win for Pierre Poilievre on a podcast that could have gone badly. We know that Joe Rogan can kind of meander. He has some views that could have got Pierre Poilievre in a bit of trouble, but instead he was able to kind of deflect and get to different conversations, different topics that were better for him than, to go too deep on COVID restrictions or things like that. So I think overall it was a good outing for Pierre Poilievre.
I do wonder if this is the first podcast involving a Canadian politician that spoke about kettlebells as often as it did. It certainly racked up quite a few, but I'll set that aside and look at the broader context here of the U.S. visit for a moment. Poilievre can't do what Carney can do. He can't travel the world looking for new partners and meet with heads of state as the Prime Minister can do. But Poilievre could go and meet some politicians in some places, though not Washington. What does that say, Ian?
Well, he didn't go to Washington, but he was with Joe Rogan. I mean, I know that Mr. Poilievre kind of indicated, I believe, that he didn't want to sort of double what Mr. Carney was doing. But he went on Joe Rogan, and Rogan clearly has ties to Donald Trump. He has ties to the, shall we say, the conservative side of the American political spectrum. And so in a way, Pierre Poilievre was able to speak to those people. And by doing well, he sort of delivered probably a helpful message. This may help, I think, Pierre Poilievre with the Americans in a way, with this move to become more of a statesman in ways that maybe today aren't entirely obvious, but that will pay off down the road. He's kind of engaged with them by going on Joe Rogan, I think, in a way that could be very productive.
Is the Pierre Poilievre that we have seen of the past couple of months, let's say post-leadership review, is that the Pierre Poilievre we should expect to see in the years to come? Catherine, I'll start with you.
That's a really good question. I think he's finally found his footing in the sense that, he now sees how he can play a role in this, tariff situation we have with the United States. He's done 2 international trips in the last 2 weeks. I don't know if he'll keep up that pace, especially that the Conservative Party is paying for it fully. But I think to Ian's point earlier, we'll have to see if he continues that tone this week in the House of Commons, which is really his favorite place to be. I think moving forward, it would be in his advantage, certainly, to be more thoughtful, more statesmanlike. And I think there are certainly efforts for him to do that. I would also encourage him to continue to give interviews, to various media outlets. Certainly he's done that here in Canada with Peter Mansbridge, with Paul Wells. And I thought those were really interesting interviews. And, he also had that same thoughtfulness. And, it was just, he's showing a new side of him that, again, was already there. We'll have to see. Things can happen. He can go back to his same, arguments and questions in the House of Commons. We'll see if that nice tone continues. But certainly, I think it's in his advantage to continue to stay thoughtful, to continue to advocate for Canada. I think that's a really good look for him. And
all of this is to position Poilievre and the Conservatives for whenever the next federal election is. Could be 3 years away. Eric Grenier, I'm going to get you to sort of pull back into your encyclopedia of political knowledge. Is there something comparable of a political leader who had a huge lead, lost an election, stuck around, and then 4 years later was able to become Prime Minister?
Well, maybe not that trail. I think that Pierre Poilievre has certainly, the fact that he had lost that 20-point lead, I think is largely unprecedented that you see something like that happen. But we've seen opposition leaders, lose elections and eventually, become prime minister later on. So I don't think that is something that is out of his wheelhouse or that is impossible. But he does have big challenges because when you lose an election, there's usually a good reason for it. They don't just happen out of the blue. And I think that in this case, what has been really problematic for Pierre Poilievre is the contrast with Mark Carney. And I do think that is what he has been trying to address over the last little while, because Mark Carney is a bit of a globetrotter, and in the current context with global uncertainty, I think Canadians like to see the Prime Minister out and discussing things with allies. And for Pierre Poilievre, who had before had really not wanted to go abroad, who wanted to be a bit of an attack dog in the House of Commons domestically here in Canada, that contrast no longer really worked for him. It worked well with Justin Trudeau, but it doesn't work with Mark Carney. So I think the fact that we've seen him in these settings where he looks serious, he's trying to present himself as a future prime minister, I think that's really what they're trying to address, is that the opposition leader, that he was very good at being an opposition leader, when you are an opposition leader and you're good at it, voters tend to keep you in that job. So I think he's trying to change the perception, because you don't want to be an opposition leader forever.
All very curious. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much to the three of you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.